This is Tell Me Exactly. I'm your host, Meridith Jensen. And today we're going to be telling you exactly how to manage the oversight committees at your agency. Joining me is one of my favorite mentors and bosses and overall just general experts in this field, Jose Rodriguez. Welcome, Jose.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Jose, you've just recently had a title change at our organization. Share that with us.
I got promoted to senior manager from manager
Yay!
position.
Where's our applause track for
Thank
that?
you.
Awesome. Yes. Okay. And so, Jose, tell us a little bit about your background and what makes you an expert in this topic as we kind of just bounce back and forth about dispatch review and dispatch steering committees as those oversight committees at agencies when they are implementing and using our products.
So in my first life before Priority Dispatch, I was at an agency where we strongly had the DRC, the Dispatch Review Committee, and the Dispatch Steering Committee. And it's one of the requirements for ACE. So when I was hired at that agency, I had a year to get them into ACE. So I was deeply involved in getting that set up in a large metropolitan agency. And then in my life in PDC, I did implementations, which again is part of the implementation process to set up the committees.
Right. And now our department is called Client Operations.
Yes.
Right? We used to be known as the Implementations Department. Now we're Client Operations.
Correct.
But yeah, heavily involved with implementing our products with agencies that are coming on board for the first time. And then, of course, also supporting our existing clients. Another part of your background that you forgot to mention is your background as a Q instructor. And this is something that Dispatch Review Committee and Dispatch Steering Committee, as also a triple discipline Q instructor, we teach this all the time, right? That's kind of where it gets started, right?
Part of the curriculum is
Part
to
of the
teach them
curriculum.
setting up the committees. Yep.
Right. And so when we talk about, first, let's start with Dispatch Review Committee, because that's kind of the one that kicks things off and kind of where everything starts. What is it? What is its purpose?
So the Dispatch Review Committee consists of dispatchers, call takers, basically personnel from the floor. You want to have middle management in there. I usually recommend agencies to have that. I call them the rah-rah person, but the person that's going to go back and say, oh, this is great, this is wonderful. And it's usually the person that not looking forward to the protocol coming into the system. Because if we can get them involved in the system early and feel like they're part of the system, they're going to be the ones that go back to promote it and say that, it's a really good system and it works because they're seeing it being built out during the implementation process.
And this is one of those, straight from the book. It's the middle working group, right? The middle management working group that is intended to help kind of draft all of those policies that need to be in place for how to use the protocols and, all of the other kind of recommendations for how we're going to make the protocols work in our specific center, because as we know, there are a lot of commonalities with every agency, but there's also a lot that is very unique in every single one of these dispatch centers, right? So that's kind of their scope, right?
Right, and it really starts from reports from Quality Assurance Department, QAU, Quality Assurance Unit, I'm sorry. It really starts with them bringing reports to the Dispatch Review Committee or the DRC, and that committee looks at reports, determines is it a policy issue, is it a training issue, process issue. And then, like you said, draft policies if needed. They're not the ones to approve those policies. They just draft them.
Right.
Or redraft them depending on feedback.
And so you talked a little bit about maybe who to invite to the table, but who is the ideal membership of these committees? So when we know that we have agencies of all different shapes and sizes, and sometimes we find, I call it the STP, right? The same three people on these committees, right? So if the sky was the limit and we had an agency that was robust enough to have all of the members that we recommend, what would that makeup look like?
So for the Dispatch Review Committee, again, I would say call takers, dispatchers, QAU units. Also, we want to have the floor supervisors involved in there, probably field personnel, because they're bringing back feedback from the field, what they're seeing on the other side of the call. We really don't want to have medical directors there. We don't want to have communications director, management at that level coming
And
into
why? Why is that? Why don't we want those heavy hitters in management?
because they probably just want to know the end result and just approve the policies. They don't need to look at the day-to-day. However often, we usually recommend a weekly meeting for these starting out new implementation. They don't need to see the details. They just need to know what they need to do on their part, approving a policy or process, whatever the case is.
Yeah, and another thing that I find too is that it's really important when you're structuring these committees that we do allow the dispatchers, the field responders, the call takers, if that's a separate person at your agency, to have a voice and really a safe place for that voice, right? And so if we get too management heavy on this committee, then sometimes that can squash some of those really good ideas that might come out in the committee if we put those other people in the other committee that we're going to talk about, right?
I agree 100%. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's kind of the who and the what. So let's talk a little bit about your experiences specific to Dispatch Review Committee. What are some of the things that you have seen that maybe, we come in and we teach about Dispatch Review Committee during quality assurance certification. We also teach about it during stakeholder kickoff and the implementation process. But what are some of the things that maybe you've seen over the years that we had this idea of what we wanted this to be on paper, but then when it comes to in fruition, it maybe doesn't pan out that way?
Well, I think you spoke to it a little bit a while ago. It just depends on the agency size. It may not have that kind of staffing to have a call taker, a dispatcher, field personnel. So it may be one person, one or two people to represent along with the QAU unit, as opposed to 5 or 6, 7 or 8 people. So it just really is dynamic to the agency size or capacity of that agency. It doesn't mean that because we recommend these people that they need to have every single one of them. Some agencies have volunteer, and because they're volunteer, they're not going to come into these committees.
Right. Or they might be too large, right? Like they have the agencies that dispatch for, 37 fire departments. You can't have somebody from every single one of those departments at this meeting every single time. And so maybe having like a handful of representatives that would serve as that voice for those responders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just what we always talk about implementations in the Q class. It's a recommendation. It's not the absolute, you have to follow this guideline. It's what works best for your agency. And it could be an existing median that already is in place too.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that because listen, we're not here to put another meeting on people's calendars that is, going to go in circles with the same objectives of the meetings that they already have. So when we do have agencies that combine these, that is absolutely a great way to do it if that's the resources that you have.
I've had plenty of agencies that say, well, we already have a meeting that we're already meeting every month. Can we just use that one? And absolutely carve out.
Please do.
15, 20 minutes to discuss reports and discuss EMD, EFD, PD. And you got to say, there's no need to create, like you said, extra meeting. Yeah. We all don't want more meetings. The less meetings we have, sometimes the better.
So let's zone in on that a little bit. So let's say that one of our listeners is from one of those agencies where they're wondering, who do I have available? I'm really worried that I don't have enough people to have 2 separate committees. How can they make sure that the goals and focus and scope of the Dispatch Review Committee, if they've combined it with the other committee that we're going to talk about in a minute, the steering committee, if they've combined those, how can they make sure that the goals and the focus and the scope is separated?
Well, I think there has to be a definite start and stop of each meeting. Obviously, in each meeting, you're going to have minutes taken or recorded, but some form of everything being documented and official. Okay, we're now at DRC. DRC is now finished. Now we start in the DSC. But it also goes back to, if that's what they have to do, that's fine. But also goes back to that intimidation factor of having higher management or administrators in that meeting. You're not going to have that open discussion, or some people might be intimidated.
Yeah. And usually what I recommend to agencies is really being purposeful about your agenda, right? If you truly have an organized agenda for each of those meetings, you're going to make sure that you have bullet points on there that are focused on what you're there for. And so that's how you can make sure to kind of keep those 2 goals and focuses and scopes separate, but also still get everything done in an efficient way with the same people.
And the other thing too, and we haven't discussed this yet, but the DRC is weekly starting out. DSC is not necessarily always weekly. It could be every other week starting out, and then it spreads out to
Mm-hmm.
once a quarter.
And we're talking in the beginning,
The
when
beginning
you're
of
just setting up an
implementing protocol.
agency.
Yeah.
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 But for those established agencies, we're maybe looking at monthly or quarterly, right? So as we're talking about that agenda and how that's such an important way to make sure that these committees accomplish what they set out to do, what are some things that you recommend to be on the agenda for again, starting just with the dispatch review committee?
So dispatch review committee, the quality assurance unit should definitely bring in reports, and we're not talking about individual reports. We're talking about department reports, how the department in general is doing.
Okay.
Maybe shifts, but not identifying individual dispatchers. That's not the committee for that, because there's the potential of being fellow co-workers there, so we don't want to discuss that there. If we have the luxury of having the field units there, we want to get their feedback on that. So that'll be an agenda item. What is the field seeing when they're out, responding to these calls? And then there's got to be carved out time if there's a policy discussion, as they're building a template or a draft of a policy. Carve out time for that. So that should be a bullet point on that agenda to talk about that. Any old business, so anything from the prior meeting that they have out there pending, that they were working on something to finish the following week.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything that needs to go to the DSC, the Dispatch Steering Committee, as an action item for the next steps.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I always recommend to agencies that they keep as kind of a standing bullet item on the agenda for every dispatch review committee is recognition.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's a really easy way to make sure that you are making space for your dispatchers to be recognized and that you're keeping space for dispatchers to be recognized, because we know that that's something that can easily kind of fall off the agenda if we don't keep space for it.
Absolutely.
And so I love to see when agencies carve out a little space on their agenda for recognition. And, maybe some months you don't have any, or maybe that is your kind of way to make sure that every meeting you're finding somebody to recognize for the big and small things.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't always have to be tied just to protocol use, right? There might be recognition for other things, or, radio performance, things like that. But I strongly feel that that's something that every dispatch review committee should carve out time for.
I agree. It could be saves. It could be baby born.
Sure.
Yep.
Or even just those, we had a really weird call the other day, and you did a fantastic job navigating through it and making sure that everybody got what they needed. Yeah.
Yep. I like it.
Okay. So now let's talk about the dispatch steering committee, which of course we start at the level of dispatch review committee. We just spoke of that. And then this dispatch steering committee is kind of floats above that, right? So that's the next level up. Tell me what the scope and purpose is of the dispatch steering committee.
So the Dispatch Steering Committee, their main focus or scope is to approve any policy drafts or recommendations from the review committee. They also look at approving if there's any response change recommendations that come from the Dispatch Review Committee. So it's not always just policies. Anything that really, any recommendations from the review committee, that's where I'll kind of summarize it.
Okay. And they are the final approvers, right?
Right.
So they stamp the approval or say, nope, go back to the drawing board. Let's redo this, right? They're also pretty heavily involved with setting up the plans for responses, right? So response configurations and planning and things like that.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know if we've talked about it yet, but who should be in attendance or who should be a member of the Dispatch Steering Committee? So you're looking at your director, sheriff, communications higher up, if it's a director, whatever that title is. You want them there because those are the final policymakers, especially on the medical one. You have your medical director. On the fire, you have your fire chief. On the police, you have your police command staff, police chief, sheriff to make those decisions. So we want them to be those final decision makers because they're the bosses there, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And, can they make every meeting? Probably 95% of the time they will. So they can send a liaison that will take notes for them and bring it back to them if they can't attend the meeting. But we definitely want representation for each one of those groups.
And this one doesn't have to meet as frequently,
Correct.
right? So the ACE point that covers these oversight committees requires dispatch review committee to meet quarterly and dispatch steering to meet biannually, twice a year. That's
Yep.
it, right? And so, yeah, there's really not a need for the steering committee to get together as frequently because that dispatch review committee needs to meet more frequently to do the work. They're the working group, right?
Yep.
Okay.
The only difference is during implementation. Because it's implementation,
Yeah.
there's a lot of changes and approvals that need to get
More
done.
frequently
More
because
frequently
we're
until-
still hammering it all out.
Yep.
Yeah. And we know that a lot is going to change as we kind of work through that.
Absolutely.
And even, if agencies want to meet more frequently, hey, more power to them. You guys
wrong
get
with
to
that.
decide. We're not driving the boat on that. But at a minimum, that's always a good idea. I think the other reason it's always a good idea to make sure that the steering committee is meeting twice a year is to make sure that they're looking at after that implementation is live and we're established, we're using the system, is everything still working, right? Are all of those policies still relevant? Do we have an update to versions that we need to be looking at and maybe some new codes that need to be configured or some new policies that need to be drafted?
One of the things we're finding in our implementations after they've gone live is during the implementation, they set up responses based on what they currently have. But after 6 months, a year of using it, we always recommend go back and look at them based on reports and see if there's anything you need to change, adjust, make better. Because now you have hard data
Right.
to know, okay, maybe we didn't need to send that kind of level on a stub toe.
Yeah.
Maybe we can tone it down a little bit.
Yeah. And if you're a longtime listener, you probably have already heard me talk about how I am a big proponent of when you go set out to make a change to something, make sure that those changes or recommendations are data driven, right?
Absolutely.
I've seen too many times agencies have knee-jerk reactions to something that's maybe more based on feelings and the emotions and all of the craziness that can surround some of these calls and outcomes and things like that. And things can get, really charged, really kind of like excited and charged. And that's not what to base your decisions on change around. You want to make sure that, yes, that's maybe where the ideas for change come from, but go to the data, look at the data, make sure that, this big change that we're talking about, is that going to affect one call that happens in a lifetime, or is it going to affect something that happens every single shift?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we know those low frequency, high acuity calls happen at the wrong time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love it. I love that you said that because it's really important to look at the data before you make changes. All right, so now we know about the dispatch review committee. We know about the dispatch steering committee. We know who is supposed to be on them, how often they're supposed to meet, what their goals and purposes and scopes are. Now let's talk about some of the lessons, right? So if we have listeners out there that, again, have not done this yet or have maybe done it in the past and it's time to refresh these oversight committees, what are some of the lessons that you've learned over the years?
So what I've learned in both as my first life and my second life is in my first life working at an agency, directors and staffing comes and goes. One of the things in one of my agencies that I worked at for the review committee, we tried to keep the ideas fresh. We would rotate people in and out. We started out every 2 years, then we moved it down to every year.
I like
just
that.
to change, get fresh ideas, fresh eyes and stuff, because you never know.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way, but people get stale and they kind
Yeah.
of get set in their ways. So bringing in fresh set of eyes. At the dispatch steering committee, we know medical directors sometimes change, chiefs change, they get promoted, they get moved out, they retire. So it's always good to always have somebody in the back, like an assistant chief always attending, so they can just, if they
Slide
move
right in.
slide
Yeah.
right in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that because you don't want these committees to become stagnant, right? And that's probably something that can kind of creep in a little bit if you're not careful.
Yep.
Because again, the frequency, the scope, on the front end, there's going to be a lot of wheels spinning, a lot of work happening, a lot that's changing. But then once you get settled in, how do you make sure that you're still keeping those goals and focuses, right?
Especially fresh ideas for training, how
love
to
it.
tackle new release updates.
Yeah.
How do we tackle those changes and stuff like that?
Okay. What are some of the things that you've seen that maybe agencies have learned in a not so ideal setting, or those hard lessons or I don't want to say horror stories, but maybe stories that you didn't expect or things that you really just had to take it and run with it. And what did you learn from that?
So one of my more memorable on this topic, it was an implementation I had years ago where we were right in the middle of stakeholder and kickoff, and we had the medical director there and some of the command staff. And we were right in the middle of, I'm trying to remember if it was response configurations or the policies on ProQA.
Mm-hmm.
And medical director, who was a medical director for the fire department and EMS department, he was also the coroner for this little town. It's a little town.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also a medical director for the only hospital in town. When he saw everything that needed to get done, that he needed to approve, he just got up, threw his ID on the table and said, I quit, and left.
He literally quit right there on the spot.
He quit and left and walked out.
In the middle of your work.
And he left 3 areas empty because he quit for the hospital, he quit for the medical examiner's office, and then he quit for the fire department.
Oh, my goodness.
And 2 weeks later, the fire department lost their EMS provider.
I can't even imagine what that must have felt like.
I had 20 pairs of eyes staring at me. Like, what do we do now? And I was like, hire somebody?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I think that's probably where that lesson you just spoke of came from, right? Have someone as a backup,
Yep.
at least learning the ropes so that if this does happen, you can, spin somewhat up more quickly.
right.
Wow, that's kind of a extreme scenario there.
That's why it was memorable.
Yeah.
It was a moment of, okay, so what do we do now? Like, okay, well, you need a medical director. So the first step is try to find a new one. Hopefully the assistant medical director, or at least fill in the fire EMS side.
Yeah.
The hospital and the medical examiner might be a different story, and they, like, within a month or two, they had somebody replace it, and we moved forward. So it just delayed it like a month. But that worked out well. At an agency, I worked in 3 agencies in my life, but 2 of them are memorable. In one agency, I had a medical director that he was up on the protocols. He sat through the EMD class. He renewed every 2 years. So he knew every time there's a new release, he would look at it. So me, as part of the QAU and DRC committee, when I would go up to him and say, hey, these are new or there's been a change in the protocol. We need to update something, either the response or the policy or something, because he knew about it. He was up on it. It was a quick conversation. Yep, I know what this is. Here you go and approve it. And my other agency, the medical director, was too busy, had other things in his mind. He was not up on the protocols. He never took EMD. He knew what it was. He had an idea of it. But every time there was a new release, he's like, okay, so what is this again? And it's like, so here's the protocol.
Sure.
Here is whatever I'm going to talk about, whatever discipline or whatever chief complaint. So it's kind of every time was like teaching him EMD all over again.
Sure.
So it just becomes more challenging. He still understood it. I mean, it wasn't that he was against the protocol. He's just because he wasn't in it. So that always becomes a little, okay, who am I talking to and who do we need to do some training with?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have both experienced working with agencies kind of all over the place for many years has been, when these committees start to kind of drop off a little bit, that it can be really challenging to get them re-engaged.
Yeah.
And so even if you can just barely keep it going with just 1 or 2 agenda items or, a smaller group of people that are still dedicated and showing up, don't let it fall completely off of the calendar, because it's really a steeper climb to get it re-engaged, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Like you mentioned before, it gets stagnant. So that's why it's good to kind of rotate them every once.
Yep.
Whatever you said. I mean, like I said, we did it every year. Whatever works best for your agency, depending on staffing and all that. But it's good to kind of rotate people in and out.
I like that. And I think that could also be used as almost a little bit of an incentive, maybe perhaps for someone, right? Like a little bit of a stair step for them to kind of learn the other side of things if they had aspirations to get into management or some other, kind of part of the comm center and get more involved.
Right.
That really gives them a first look at what this is like and exposes them to that. So I think that could be used in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like field responders and call takers and dispatchers, they see behind the curtain. It's not because we said so. It's not because, the academy said so.
Right.
It's actually science-based, decisions that are made.
Yeah. One thing that I just want to point out that you brought up earlier as part of the scope of both of these committees, that is another area that I think both of us have experienced, maybe doesn't happen as much as we'd love to see it happening, is that field feedback, the feedback coming from responders, and how this is kind of a place for those paramedic crews when they show up on scene and they find something that maybe is a little bit different than what they thought it was going to be, that there is a comprehensive process for them to kind of track and report that and have those conversations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so field responder feedback form is really, really good. It kind of lets the field units have a way into the system. And to your point, some field responders might say, hey, you sent us on a cardiac arrest call. When we got there, the guy was outside smoking a cigarette. Your call takers or whoever took the call didn't take the call properly.
Right.
So it's a way for them to be in there, but another agenda item, going back to these are on agenda, it's another agenda item and talked in a review committee. A lot of times is when you research a QA, you will listen to the call, see if there's anything amiss, but maybe what we're looking at is a process. Is it that we're oversending on some type of call that it wasn't necessarily a cardiac arrest? Is it something in the CAD that's coded wrong? So it's a good way to review it and get that feedback to those units so they know we value what you're finding. Here's what we found out.
Right.
You're right or you're wrong, whatever the case is, but this is what we found out.
Right. And many times it's not that the system is broken. It's, that there's maybe a misunderstanding in some place, or we're only as good as the information the caller tells us, right? Sometimes they don't tell us that patient that was having chest pain actually just delivered a baby in the garage. That was a real one that I had.
Right.
And the one thing that I think is most important about having that as a part of your active DRC and DSC is to make sure that those types of conversations happen as a group, right? That it doesn't just become one person sort of yelling at the other person and it dies there because nobody takes it any further and researches it. And that it's also tracked, right? Because, hey, if this is happening time and time again, maybe then it's time to submit a proposal for change because maybe we're not asking the right questions, or maybe we're not asking the questions in the right way to get the more specific information from callers. And so that's the value, in my opinion, the biggest value of having this field responder feedback process as a part of these oversight committees. All right, Jose, so just to close this out, is there anything else that you want to share that you, in your experience, again, we both have had lots of experience over the years with different agencies, that if somebody's listening that's not gone through this before, what would be your kind of one takeaway tip for how to really get this off on a good foot right from the start?
Don't give up. It's the biggest advice I can give. It's challenging. Not everybody, like we talked about earlier, not everybody wants another meeting on their calendar, but be creative. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour meeting. It could be sometimes a half-hour short meeting. It could be 20 minutes. It could be an hour. But just be creative. Bring donuts. Sometimes everybody loves donuts. So
I love it.
It's just an incentive. People come in. That's probably the biggest advice. There's challenges. Some people don't want to be involved, and people leave, people come, and sometimes the meetings are great. Sometimes the meetings are not so much. But don't give up.
Yeah, and I think if there's anything else that I would add to that, it would just be that one size does not fit all.
Absolutely.
Right? Make it work for your agency, for your unique challenges and successes and resources that you have available. So, and reach out. If you really don't know where to start, or you really just are struggling with one of the, points of this, we're here to help with that, right?
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Jose, for joining me today. I always have a great time talking to you. You're one of my favorite people, and I always, just really get a lot out of spending time with you. So thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to let us know what you liked, and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Look for @TellMeExactly to get the latest on all things emergency communications. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast developed by our team of protocol experts and hosted by me, Meridith Jensen, with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, Scott Robinson and Jason Barber as executive producers.